The Choose Love movement offers no-cost solutions that keep our kids safe, providing them with the skills and tools they need to flourish. Join us in our mission to create the world we want to live in, one that's connected and compassionate. Check us out at chooselovemovement.org. Together, we can choose love.
Hi, everyone. My name is Scarlett Lewis, and I'm the founder of the Jessie Lewis Choose Love movement and the one who runs the Choose Love podcast. I am so happy today to be with one of my very dear and bestest friends, Kristen Deitz. I call her KB. I have nicknames for lots of people. And so I don't know, I've called you KB since middle school. So if you hear me calling Kristen KB, that's because that is my nickname for her. And it's so good to see you here. We've been friends for decades now.
We have too long to count. Let's not let everybody know exactly how long.
Okay, that's fine. But suffice it to say, we have been through so much together. And that includes from school and all the issues there and relationships then to moving into adulthood and jobs and relationships there and kids. And now we were just talking about how we're in this really unique place where our kids are independent and we're going to be getting together for some girl time. But I really wanted to talk to you today because of what I witnessed when your kids were young and we would visit together. You are an amazing mom, but you also dealt with some really unique and interesting challenges. And I wanted to really focus on those today because the outcomes that I've seen are tremendous. Just your kids are incredible. The last time we Zoomed together, these two just beautiful inside out young adults coming willingly to say hello to your childhood friend, poking in the questions that they asked. Hey, how's it going? How is Choose? Like just very interested, curious, friendly, composed, self-aware, self-confident, just really incredible. And I know the journey from the beginning to what it took to get there. And so I was hoping that maybe you would share with us from the beginning and all of the really extreme measures that you took to do what was in your kids' best interests in order to help them flourish.
Sure. So happy to be here. Hi, everybody. Thanks for listening today. My name is Kristen Deitz. So I have a 20-year-old and a 19-year-old. My daughter is 20, and it really all started with her. So after she was born, she couldn't latch on to breast or bottle. She screamed incessantly. She hardly slept. She just wasn't a well baby, and the pediatrician was convinced she just had severe colic. And then I noticed in that 6 to 12 month window that she wasn't meeting her milestones. She still wasn't sleeping well. She had chronic ear infections, and she just wasn't a baby that responded to stimuli. She didn't respond to her name. She was a little bit kind of in her own little world and just wasn't meeting those developmental milestones that we typically see happen, in those very formidable 6 to 12 month years and then beyond. And when she was 15 months old, I had her at my parents' house, and my mom and I watched her take every shoe out of the closet and line them up like a snake out the door and into the room. And my mom looked at me and she said, Kristen, that's not normal. Like, there's something wrong there. I'm like, really? You think? And she's like, yeah, there's something wrong. So I took her to the pediatrician, And he wrote down on my sign out sheet, PDD-NOS. He didn't tell me what that was. And he said, call this number. It's called early intervention. It's run through the state. They'll be able to help you. And I'm like, okay, but like doing what? He's like, just call them. You're fine. And I was like, this is so bizarre. Looking back, like he didn't even have time to explain to me what PDD-NOS is, which is pervasive developmental disorder, not otherwise specified, which is one of the highest sort of generic classifications on the DSM for autism spectrum disorder. So that was a blow. Like, oh my God, my kid has autism. Holy moly. What does that even mean? And so what
did you have to go home and look that up?
Oh yeah, totally.
Okay.
And like this was, thank God, the computer age. Like Google was there. So, you know, Google became my friend. And I started doing a lot of research. I called early intervention, and I learned that our states, each state has tons of dollars that they invest into two programs that are public. One is your early intervention, which is for children 0 to preschool or kindergarten age, where they have behavioral therapists, occupational therapists, speech and language, all the different therapists that will basically come into your home and administer those therapies to your child in order to help them to meet those milestones and get them to where they're ready to enter the public school, where they then take over through.
When you say my state, you're talking about specifically New Jersey, and probably each state is a little bit different in their priorities, right?
Every state is mandated to have these early intervention programs. There are dollars designated towards these programs, as well as into the public school system. And that's where an individualized education program, or an IEP, is what's used to put your child into receiving these ongoing services in the public school environment. So again, those can be OT, PT, physical therapy, speech therapy, but also our special education programs. Everything that's administered through them comes from these state funds. And so I became very familiar with that because Kylie was, once we did the initial intake, she was receiving 20 hours of in-home therapy a week, which was like social skills, behavioral skills, speech, because her mouth and her muscles and her tongue wasn't fully developed, like their motor skills were lacking.
When did that start? How old was she?
Well, from the very beginning, I didn't realize when she couldn't latch on that was the lack of motor function.
Right. Okay.
So it was very interesting. Like it all kind of started to fall into place when these therapists came to my home and started educating me. And, you know, over a good period of time, 6 to 12 months, we had these folks come in and they became like our second family. And I was doing all my research then. And I started to learn that there is a gut-brain connection with a lot of these kids. And so if you clean up their gut, you kind of clean up their brain. So through my research, I found 2 doctors that I started working with who were kind of all about this, like clean things up, and then we'll get your neurological kid in order. And a lot of those things were diet based, like eliminating casein, which is dairy, eliminating gluten, adding certain things to their diet, you know. And so we started a lot of those things, and they were really impactful. We actually saw a huge difference within 3 days after taking Kylie off of olive dairy. She started responding to her name and laughing when you tickled her, like crazy things, and like looking at you when you called her name, which she had never done before. We thought, I even had her hearing checked because I thought maybe it was a hearing problem. So it's really interesting. And so
can I ask, what were the things that you added?
So I'm going to get into that.
Okay. All right.
For 1 second. So the way I think about this, and that parents can think about this, is an easy analogy. These therapists and these programs, these public programs, think of your child as a car. They come in and they detail, wash and wax your car several times a week. They also make sure that they take it in for oil changes and its regular service appointments. They make sure that they change the tires every 30,000 miles so that your car looks great and it can properly, safely function on the road. It's safe to drive, right? And so that's kind of what these therapists and these programs do. But when we look under the hood, what we often find with these kids is that they came off of the factory line with a manufacturer's defect. So they were born with an inability to methylize certain things, which is proteins, vitamins, and minerals. And those are the basis of our cells. So our mitochondria, not to get too scientific here, but our mitochondria are kind of like the transmission of our car. And they need certain vitamins, minerals, and proteins in order for them to function. And the mitochondria actually powers the engine, which then powers not only our body, but our brains. And our brains have neurons that are firing every nanosecond. And when our mitochondria is compromised, those neurons don't fire as quickly. They're kind of slowed down. And then through that slowdown, think of it like a California highway. As it slows down, it gets congested and those neurons get crossed and those pathways get cluttered. And those can present themselves as several things: developmental disorders or disabilities, behavioral disorders or disabilities. And then what we're seeing that then creep into is, as they get a little bit older, mental health disorders and disabilities. So things like obsessive compulsive disorder, bipolar, anxiety, depression. And so all the things that are kind of plaguing society today. Yeah. And so think of our vitamins and minerals as the gas and the oil that you put into the car every day. But if your engine and your transmission can't process it, it just leaks. Let's think of it as a hole in your engine and in your lines. It just runs out the bottom and onto the pavement. And so when I started working with these doctors, we learned that Kylie had a methylation disorder or dysfunction, let's call it, and that she was extremely deficient in vitamin B12. It was like way, way, way low. Also folinic acid. And these are kind of like the gas and the oil for our cells, for the mitochondria. There's several others: zinc, vitamin D. We're all deficient in vitamin D. We're just built that way as humans. We never get enough vitamin D. And then certain proteins, and then there's minerals and that are not good that build up in the body. Then those can be copper and other things, and those kind of taint the cells. So they slow down those neural transmitters as well. And so when we discovered this with Kylie, based on what is a very simple blood draw that any doctor today can do, and it's called a methylation panel. And that methylation panel shows where we're lacking and deficient in those vitamins and minerals. And so we started giving her several supplements, like a super duper booster supplement, like an everyday multi that was compounded at a pharmacy. Like these are pharmacological grade supplements, not necessarily what you can get at your local CVS. And then things like folinic acid. And then with the B12 specifically, what was interesting is the body doesn't absorb it orally very well at all. And so it's not uncommon. This is not unusual. A lot of pregnant women take B12, but they take it as an injection. It's an injectable, concentrated dose, and the body absorbs that better, and it gets into our cells and into the mitochondria. So people who are severely lethargic often go to their internist and they'll get B12 shots because it gives us energy and it helps us sleep better. And so we started B12 when she was 2 years old, doing the shots. And it was like a complete transformation. My child was in the room with me all of the time. And she was starting to respond to stimuli. She was socializing. She was engaging. She was starting to like do things like read, and like, it was like this veil came off. Wow. So it's fascinating. It's really fascinating. Yeah. So what's interesting too that I've learned along the way is that this manufacturer's defect that these kids are born with, we some of us have this today. We don't know it because we haven't done a methylization panel, but our own, how we function today, if we're feeling brain fog, fatigue, anxiety, restlessness, difficulty sleeping, not able to lose weight, all these things can be part of a methylization dysfunction in the body.
That's so fascinating. Now, have you had the test?
I have not.
Okay.
What I've learned is that this is also genetic.
Okay.
So, it's not something that, is over time happens, like you're born with this, and it comes from either mom or dad or both.
Okay. So I remember you visiting, we were at the Blue Heron store, which is my mom's little antique shop. And so the ice cream truck was coming, and I had my two boys, Jesse and JT, and they were like, ice cream. And I said, oh yeah, let's all get some ice cream. And so I remember you saying, my kids get a special treat. So you walked over to your car, you opened the back, and you had a cooler. And while my kids had ice, these pops or whatever, your kids had something else that was, and you explained to me, sugar and dairy free. So this, you're out in the world. You had to be prepared when you went for a visit to, you were very strict is my point about what your kids ate.
Yeah, no. So we were definitely gluten-free, dairy-free, tried to really limit sugar because sugar feeds behaviors like ADD and ADHD. There's also certain dyes in foods. And so that whole, you are what you eat, we are what we eat. Like our diet's really important, but for these kids especially, they're never going to get totally what they need from their diet. They can't get it just from food. Like we have to supplement in order for the mitochondria and the cells to get the vitamins, the gas and the oil that it needs to function properly.
It's so fascinating. And here's, what you're saying is your journey, and it worked 100%. You have two kids that are mainstreamed and college and college bound. I mean, just incredible. I had someone that I worked with in the past come for a farm visit, and she has a child that has been diagnosed with autism. And I noticed that they had a big bag of lollipops. And so in order to get her compliant, come up here, stay away from that, be quiet, that type of thing, they would reward with a lollipop. And I said, I have a friend, I talk about you all the time, really, in many different situations. And she successfully treated her kids with diet And I didn't know all of these details. Isn't it amazing? We've been friends for decades and decades, and I didn't know your journey 100%. Anyway, so I said she's successfully treated her children with diet, and and she was saying, well, is it evidence-based? And I said, well, what do you mean by that? Because she's had an incredible outcome. And she said, well, is it backed up by peer-reviewed scientific research? Because if it's not, then my husband isn't going to do it. And that blew my mind, because if I were a parent of a special needs child and someone suggested that something worked, and it makes sense. We know that sugar and casein and, these other things aren't necessarily good for most people, and some people in particular. That's well known. And they just brushed it aside. They didn't even care. They didn't, like, I would say, oh, tell me everything about her. Can I call her? And it was amazing to me. So are you familiar? I know you've lived it, but the research out there and.
Yeah, so that's a great point. So 20 years ago, when this first started with Kylie, the Defeat Autism Now, which is the DAN community, had only been around for about 4 years. It was very emerging, very new, very sort of like, this whole that was when this whole storm around vaccines causing autism, which there was no basis for. But this DAN community was creating exponential awareness, and it was very new and innovative at the time. And there wasn't a lot of studies. There wasn't a lot of evidence-based stuff out there to say, and there was a movement among the parents that were like me that said, you know what, I don't care about that. I'm going to try it. And if it works, then it works for me. And that's my evidence base. And so it was pretty novel. And I understand your friend's position, because my ex at the time was like, okay, this is like, we're going to shoot up our kid every night with B12. Like, that's a little frightening. And I was like, I know, but you got to have faith. Like, believe me, I've done the research. I went to a DAN conference. That's where I met a lot of other parents like myself, some who had kids who were suffering much more greatly than mine, and some that were like mine, but a whole spectrum of, from severe autism to just severe ADD, ADHD, a lot of OCD, a lot of mild to moderate functioning autism. And we were all on this sort of quest for knowledge and how we could at home treat our kids with the support of a doctor, like a physician, to kind of guide us down this new path. Now, here we are 20 years later, and there is a ton of evidence. And so you can pretty much Google, not only on the DAN website, but this is a global thing. There are studies that have been done in New Zealand, Australia, Europe, about how using certain protocols when it comes to just supplementation. And this is not in just children, this is in adults who are in their 30s, in their 50s and 60s, who are starting to get brain fog, who can't remember, who aren't sleeping well, who are presenting with postmenopausal symptoms. When these doctors start treating them with certain supplements and minerals, their life changes because their body's changing, and it changes their mood and their ability to function and their energy, their sleep, their everything. It's really powerful.
So do you have a few names that you could provide of the experts that you relied on, or who is front and center now in this effort?
So I don't know if I feel comfortable doing that. There are in the United States some sort of leaders, like the trendsetters who started the DAN organization, who are physicians that are a part of contributing to DAN. And you can Google those. I know some parents that drive and fly across the country to see these specialists to treat their kids. And also know too that some of the parents that I met early on with kids my age who were doing the treatments like I was, some of us are still doing it today. So like this, think of it like this is a lifelong thing. Like there's no way to fix your methylizer. It's broken. It's deficient. So like we constantly have to do things in order to make up for the fact that we don't methylize. So today, Kylie, who's 20 and a half, still does B12 shots. Okay. And still has a battery of supplements that she takes in order to minimize her anxiety, to help her better focus, to help her sleep better, to have more energy, to feel happier, like just for her to be a healthy, happy, well-adjusted young adult. We still do these things today.
Interesting. Okay. Yeah. So it's a lifelong process. It's not something to be fixed. It's something to be managed.
Correct.
Yeah.
And, like I said, the behavioral therapists today who are out there who are treating, our mental health community, like they're wonderful. Those coping strategies, being able to like have mindfulness, spiritual, all those things are wonderful and they help, but they're like keeping your car washed and waxed. You go to the car wash every week. Like that's how we keep our car in good shape. We make sure we do our oil changes and our checkups and we change our tires. Like those are important things. Otherwise we wouldn't be safe on the road. But in addition to that, we also need to make sure that, we're putting the gas and the oil in and the transmission and the engine are functioning properly.
Fascinating. It really is. And I know that this is going to help a lot of people that are listening. And, it's just incredible to have a perspective of a real life mom who has lived through this.
And I think too, our doctor, who's Dr. Newbrander, he calls Kylie one of his recovered kids, because she outgrew her IEP. She no longer needed those supports in school. She didn't need the therapies. She didn't need additional time on tests. She didn't need to be in the front of the classroom or in a smaller classroom. Like eventually she was able to sort of outgrow, if you will, and able to function in a normal public education setting, have a social life, have a normal life, but I don't know that these kids are ever recovered. And then there's two, caveat, not all kids respond to this treatment. It's not enough. Maybe their manufacturer's defect is too significant, and that's where we can't recall the part in this case, and so we just work around it. And that's where I do like these therapies and other things, because those are the things that keep kids who can't overcome the manufacturer's defect at least in a position where they can function in society, but need those additional supports to do so. And so I look at it as a two-pronged approach. And I do think today there is evidence-based studies out there. And I'm hopeful that even the normal pediatric community and like our internists and GPs start to look at this as a sort of body holistic thing, not just, oh, you're feeling depressed and you're postpartum. Well, I'm just going to prescribe some drugs. Let's do a little Lexapro and you're going to feel great in 3 months. That's totally normal to feel like that after a baby. Like, okay, but like maybe there's something more going on there. Maybe we need some B12 shots right now. because we're overtired. We haven't slept. We have a brand new baby and we're overwhelmed and like, and so I'm hopeful that, we're slowly getting there. And, you talk to so many people who believe in like the body and the mind and how connected they are, and treating us from the inside out and doing things that are good for our bodies so that they're good for our minds. And so I'm hopeful that we continue on this path in like our general medicine, your typical MDs, they start to embrace these things more too.
I totally agree. It can't just be a pill. It has to be pills along with education and learning and effort. Nothing's as easy as a pill for the most part. It does require effort. I say with school safety, it's not a law, it's not a pill, but it is a positive action. We know the opposite of anxiety is positive action. Once you take that towards your children's safety, health, and well-being, you want to do more, and it empowers you and makes you more self-confident. And I think that it is really important with the incredibly fast progression of science and medicine and research. I just read Tony Robbins' new book, Life Force, and he said, when a doctor graduates from med school, it's like things go so quickly that there's no way that they can be up to date. I think it's like 81 days later on, there are going to be new things coming out. And so it's so important that we do our own research. That means that we're curious about what's going on with ourselves, and we have to search for what the solution is for ourselves, and we have to be a part of that process. And you definitely are an incredible example, especially decades ago, in researching, and then also I'll say having the courage to do something positive as well as different. And I think that we don't give courage enough credit in this process. It actually takes courage to step outside of your overwhelm, fear of the future and what's going on right there, and unknowing and anxiety and everything else that you were feeling, to go on that search and to try something that's different. I know after the Sandy Hook tragedy, so many people came in with all of these just incredibly weird sounding, but, innovative and brand new trauma reducing techniques. And I tried them all. Just for me, it was like, why not? Because they won't hurt. They might help. But I noticed that a lot of other people didn't. And their reaction was, well, it worked for her, but what if it doesn't work for me? What if it doesn't? And so I think that's the courage part, where we literally cultivate that within ourselves to face the issue and then be part of the solution to it. And you're a great example. Thank you for that.
No, thank you. And the one thing I've talked to many parents along the way who've been on a similar journey. And the one thing I like to tell them is, you know your child better than anybody. Mm-hmm. And so whatever you're seeing, whatever you're feeling, whatever your gut is saying, I know there's something deeper here and something more that can be done to help me and my child. Like, that is a great motivator. I remember when the doctor told me, well, she's just colic, when Kylie was screaming, 16 hours out of the day. And he was like, she just has colic. And I was like, no, this has to be something more. Like, she's not okay.
Yeah, I remember you telling me that she stands in front of the refrigerator and just screams because, she couldn't express what she wanted.
No, so listen to your mom intuition, listen to yourself, know that you know your child better than anybody, even your young adult child. Like my children are now young adults, and I know when Kylie's like not doing great or needs something more or we need a reset. Like I'm still her mom. Like we still know. So listen to yourself, know that you know, use that as your courage and your guide. And you mentioned the trauma folks that came in after Sandy Hook. It's very interesting. I think people are a little afraid, like you said, of things that are different or a little unknown or a little uncomfortable or might seem a little odd. But like you said, these are all things that couldn't hurt. They were just mindfulness practices or other ways to kind of get over the PTSD, right? And so why not? Why not, right?
Why not a shot of B12? Sounds good to me.
I know.
Well, thank you so much for joining us and for sharing your story, having the courage to share your story. I know that it's going to help a lot of people, and looking very much forward to visiting with you and doing some self-care together, having a lot of fun, which we've had a lot of during our lives. I have to say together. But thanks, KB, for choosing love.
Of course. And thank you, Scarlett, for having me. Happy to share my story. I hope that it resonated with some of the folks out there today.
Thank you.
Hey, hey, oh. It's all part of us. We can all choose love. It'll lift you up if you let it in. Let the healing